let us start with a poetry. Now, see, when we talk about poetry, there are few things that you need to remember. Okay. In poetry, it can be 2 lines, 4 lines, 6 lines, 3 lines, 5 lines also. Okay. So whenever we are working on any form of poems, we don't usually work on the number of lines. Okay. If you're working on number of lines, then it is a type of a poem that we are going to look now. Okay. In poems, though poems are usually rhyming words, they use rhyming words, they use rhythms there. But again, there is something called as free verse. We will be learning about that also. Nowadays, most of the poets, okay, they are using free verse to, to connect with the audience on a level, because now not all of us can easily understand it until and unless someone is there to explain. So even when we were kids in schools, and there are poems, Hindi, English, or your regional languages, so there used to be a understanding that we used to get from our teachers. Now those things are not easily available. Plus, most of the people have started using free verse. Free verse is where you don't work on rhythms, you don't work on rhymes, you rather don't even work on the number of lines, you don't even have even numbers. Many writers, many poets, they work on even number of lines, like 6 lines, 4 lines, 8, 16 lines, 32 lines. Okay. So these are the even number lines that they use. But nowadays, these things have, now you have limericks, you have free verse. Okay. So these are the things that does not, it gives the meaning. Okay. It tells you about what the poem is all about, what the poet is trying to say. But yes, it does not use the different forms of poetry which people usually used to use. Okay. Now, let us first understand the difference between poetry and prose. Before that, I am going to share some examples so that you can understand them clearly. Okay. Now, prose are basically, these are, these are very, very straightforward form of content. Okay. In poetry, you use quite, rhythms, you use rhymes, you use lots of expressions and emotions. In in your prose, such type of things are not there. Anything that the author wants to say, they directly say it. Okay. Yes, you have to understand the inner meaning of those dialogues, okay, or of those prose. So let me show it to you. Okay, there is one very famous prose by Charles Dickens. Okay, A Tale of Two Cities. I will show you. 1 second. Okay. Yes. Okay. Now, happy families are alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So now happy families are alike. Okay. Now we are all happy. They are trying to say, the author is trying to say here that all the happy families are same because they feel happy, they are together. So they feel happy with each other. Every unhappy family has their own reasons to be unhappy. Okay. When we see happy families, they are common. Their happiness is because of some common reasons. But when we see unhappiness is because of some particular reason which is unique to each family. Okay. See this one, Charles Dickinson. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. If you have read this novel, A Tale of Two Cities, very nice book. Okay. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. Okay. In this particular novel, the author is trying to talk about two cities and the people in those cities. Okay. And how the times were affecting those people. Okay. So that is what it was saying. There were people who enjoyed that particular time, and for some people that time was really bad. Okay. Some people had the wisdom to come out of those bad times, and some people were so foolish that they couldn't understand what is happening with them. Okay, so these are called your prose. You better not you better not never tell nobody but God. Okay. Now, in your prose, it is not always compulsory to work on the grammar. Okay. If you look at it, you better not never tell nobody but God. If you check out the grammar, the grammar here is not very clear. Rather, it is wrong also. Okay. In prose, in poems, you don't work on the grammar as such, because your major aim is to tell people about the topic or say the emotions that you are trying to use in the poem. So that is why whenever you're working on prose, on poems, or one-liners, two-liners, grammar doesn't make a lot of difference. Okay. Now, here I'm going to write down the differences between the prose and poem. Okay. Now, prose is basically, this is a sentence. Okay. A very, very direct sentence. Okay. Sentences, and sometimes they can be paragraphs also. Okay. Then your poems have a particular form. Okay. Has a particular form, and they can be rhythmic in nature. Okay. Then you, in your prose are basically very, very straightforward. Okay. And your poems, they have, every poem, they have very unique. Okay. Each poem has got a very unique style, and they have their rhythms. Okay. Then in your prose, the feelings, expressions, they are expressed very lucidly. Okay. That means you have to read between the lines. Okay. You have to understand what they're trying to say. In poems, the feelings and expressions, they are expressed very, very intensely. Okay. So if a poet is showing that the poet is sad, or maybe the characters in the poems are sad, so you can feel that because the feelings are very, very intense. If they're talking about happiness feeling, so that feeling will also be very intense. Okay. Now, your prose are very practical in nature. Okay. They give you practical information about any type of situation or maybe an incident. Okay. And in your poems, they try to delight or they try to amuse the reader. Okay. Then in your prose, these sentences are arranged in your paragraphs or in a sentences. Okay. In your in your poems, you have stanzas. You don't have paragraphs. Okay. You have stanzas. So in your prose, you have sentences. They are arranged in paragraphs. Okay. Or just sentences. In poems, you have stanzas. Okay. Your prose can be paraphrased. Okay. But your poems are impossible to do that. If you try to paraphrase your poem, it will be a new poem. Okay. It will be very difficult for you to paraphrase a poem. Okay. Clear for everyone? So that is the basic difference between your poem and a prose. Okay. So we discussed about the definitions. We discussed about the structure. Okay. So these are the structure is stanzas. Poems always work on stanzas. Okay. But in prose, you use different types of sentences. Those sentences can be long, short sentences, can be compound, complex sentences also. It can be paragraph as well. Okay. Now that the scope, basically, that is what I told you here. They express different types of ideas, opinions, okay, in sentences. In poetry, they use basically stanzas. They don't use paragraphs. Okay. The nature of the prose is basically tries to it does not use any type of rhythm or any type of rhyme. Rather, they express their feelings very, very openly. Okay. Poetry, they use lots of expressions, they use lots of emotions, they use lots of words which can be rhythmic or which cannot be rhythmic in pattern. Okay. Also at the same time, it is not compulsory to use a grammatical structure. Okay. But if in your poems you can use a grammatical structure, then it is good. Otherwise, it is really not compulsory. Many a times people who are working on free verse, okay, free verse poets, they use a combination of languages. Okay. You might have heard many people or you might have read poems where they are using Hindi English mix. They're using some regional language with the other say English or Hindi. Okay, there are many poems which use French and English, Latin and English. Okay, so such type of poems also you will use, you will read, which does not use the specifications what people used to use earlier. Okay, so that is why there are a lot of changes in the poetry, but prose is something that people have been following, and prose is a normal sentence, any type of thing that people can understand. The you need to understand from the expressions that the author is trying to use. Okay.